Good morning, glad you could join me. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do a shamrock pendant. For those of you of the Irish persuasion, you might find this interesting. What we're going to do is we're going to take some clear rod and we're going to work it together until we get a pretty decent sized ball. And then we're going to mash it down to make it nice and flat, or to give us a flat surface. We're going to take green, white, and orange rod colors, and we're going to form a 3-leaf shamrock instead of a 4. And then we'll work it in so that way it's nice and solid. Cover over with some clear glass and pop it into my kiln, which I have running up over there. Alright, so let's get started. Let's start by breaking out the big burner here. So, if you're using a Carlisle torch, you want to go ahead and set up to use your big burner. If you have something else, a Nortel or a bead torch, then you're going to want to make it to go as big as you possibly can. Now I'm using a very long 8mm clear glass rod here to begin with. You use whatever you have on hand. If you have something a lot bigger, you won't need to gather as much glass. I know I have some 12 or 15mm rod lying around here, but the trouble I find with such a thickness in glass rod is that you really have to take the time to preheat it. Otherwise, the rod starts cracking just like it would if it were a soft glass rod. Okay, now this goes pretty quickly here when you have a lot of glass rod, especially when you crank the heat right from the beginning. And I don't want this too big. One of the troubles with really intricate glass pendants is that in order to get all that detail, you need to start with something big and try to reduce it. And more or less what you end up having at the end, I find, is a very, very large pendant that is kind of gauche. It's not something that you can wear just every day. So we don't want to do that. Now, that's more or less the amount of glass I want. It's nothing really huge at this point. It's probably about a ½ inch in diameter. And this is all eyeballed. You know, I'm not breaking out my calipers and making sure that it's an approximate measurement every time. You want to do this entirely by eye, and you do what's comfortable for you. If you find that having more glass gives you a larger more glass will give you a larger surface area, and if you find that that makes it easier for you to work, then go for it. Now, when we come to the mashing part, a lot of people, by most techniques, will get the rod nice and hot, and then they'll take a nice flat piece of graphite and they'll press down in this fashion, giving it a slight twist as they do that. I've done that before. It doesn't always work very well for me, so I tend to paddle it in midair. You do, again, whatever's most comfortable for you. You will find that both techniques work equally well. It is entirely dependent on what gets you the best results for your piece. We're going to go ahead and get this nice and hot. And the thing you have to be careful of, and what I'm doing here is just the main part of glass that I want to round over and work is in the flame. But you got to watch your rod here, because the glass is going to want to sag. So you have to make sure you're you're turning it. And then I've let it sit for a bit, and I'm going to let it turn. I'm going to press it in a little bit more. And that's the other advantage I find in midair, is that I can press it into a shape that I'm a little bit more comfortable with. Now this is what is called a Maria. It's just a gather of glass. But for most pendants, I find that then working like this can be very difficult. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I have the glass in a pretty decent gather here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mash it down onto this using my paddle and the paddle I've hooked up to my Carlisle torch here. We're going to go ahead and flatten it straight out like a pancake. So we've got it nice and hot, and squish. And just like that, it's nice and flat. Now, when I squished it down, part of the rod got caught up here in the top, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that you heat this back up, get it nice and soupy hot, and then come back over and a light press, nothing hard. Once you've got the diameter, once you've got about the rough size of your pendant that you want, stop mashing hard. You'll need to mash a little, but not hard, because then it's going to keep stretching out, and it's not going to do any good for you. Okay, so now this is plenty hot. So, let's turn off our big burners. We've got just our small central piece here. And I think I'm going to start, I like to start with the middle one. The middle leaf. So I'm going to go ahead and get my rod nice and warm here. And this is the part you have to be very, very careful with. If you are the sort of person that likes to draw, you'll find that these techniques are pretty good for you. What I would advise you to do to practice is if you have a chalkboard or a whiteboard at home, or you have access to one, practice drawing using your arm like this. You know, almost the way a teacher seems to write quickly on a chalkboard or a whiteboard. Practice drawing in that fashion. That will get your hands more accustomed to the drawing technique used with glass. All right, we're going to go ahead and touch that. I'm going to draw it down toward the center and pull up. And now, normally you would try to burn off this extra little bit that's hanging here. I'm just going to slowly work that back in, because I'm using a slightly thicker, this is probably 6 millimeters, this white rod, and that can be harder to draw with. I would say most professionals tend to draw with stringers. I have a little bit of difficulty with that, so I make do the best I can, and you again will do with what is most comfortable for you as your skills improve. Okay, that looks good. I like that. Now, I'm done with the white rod for now, so let's just set it down. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start working this in. I want to heat up the white, and using my tweezers, I'm going to pull off this end. One thing I didn't do when I was putting the rod on the clear glass here, is I didn't press it down into the middle. And I did that on purpose. The reason I did that is because when you start pressing the rod into the center, all of your leaves for this shamrock are going to move toward the center, which means you would get a very heavy gather of glass in the middle. Drop it over in my junk bucket, and that's no good. So what you want to do is you want to pull off a lot of that excess glass. And the thing to remember is this whole piece needs to stay pretty hot. There's not a whole ton of strain in the clear glass because you've thrown a lot of heat at it, but as you're working the clear and the color together, make sure you throw a little heat on the back of it as well. And you want to heat not only the colored piece, but the clear glass around it. This is going to help your color to sink in. Almost as though you were doing an implosion bead, but not quite so much, not quite so involved. And then a light paddle on the surface, very light, almost like you were stroking an animal's fur, that is. Just light paddling. You just want it to keep its shape and help to encourage the colored glass to move into the clear. If you push too hard, you're going to squish it in there and ruin any detailing that you took the time to do. Okay, and that's good enough. So I'm going to move on to my next color. So I'm going to do the orange. And it doesn't really matter where you put it. If you're going to want to be true to the Irish flag, you make sure you get your orient it properly. I just wanted to get the colors in there. So, get this orange nice and heated up. Go ahead, throw a little heat at my clear, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to start our drawing. And touch it down, draw it to the center. Whoop. Now that one didn't quite stick, so no problem. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this down. I have a piece of wood here that I'm using as a rack to set my glass down on top of. What I've found in my time doing this is that wood is a little better. You can treat it. You can soak wood in water ahead of time, or frankly, if it's just a nice hardwood like oak, sometimes you'll get some smoky burning from it if you touch really hot rods down to it. But ultimately, it's not going to burn away quickly.